Greetings, fellow mathematicians. Let's talk about the mathematics that children learn in Year 2. In Year 1, children have been adding and subtracting single-digit numbers to get over tens numbers using place value. In Year 2, they're going to start to add and subtract first tens numbers and then two-digit numbers. They can't jump straight from one-digit numbers to two-digit numbers because they've never added or subtracted tens numbers yet. So initially they're going to investigate counting forwards and backwards by tens on the decade and then off the decade. And they're going to investigate which digit changes and why. So for example, if we're adding tens, we're adding 1 10 and 0 ones. So the ones digit is never going to change because we're adding or we're subtracting 0 ones. The tens digit will change because we're adding or subtracting 1 10. Now we're also going to be investigating three-digit place value, and the first three-digit number is 100. Children are going to investigate seeing 100 in three ways: as 100, as 10 tens, and as 100 ones. The 10 tens is key to getting them to be able to add and subtract two-digit numbers and tens numbers over 100. So for example, if we have 70 and we want to add 50, calling them 7 tens and 5 tens is going to make the understanding much deeper. So we could go 7 tens plus 1 10 is 8 tens, plus 1 10 is 9 tens, plus 1 10 is 10 tens, plus 1 10 is 11 tens, plus 1 10 is 12 tens. So calling them tens rather than hundreds, seeing hundreds flexibly, is going to deepen children's understanding of this really important concept. Children will then begin to add and subtract tens numbers, counting by tens. Children will then investigate partitioning tens numbers so that we can get to 100. So for example, they partitioned 7 into say 6 and 1, 5 and 2. Now they're going to partition 70 in the same way. They could partition 70 into 60 and 10, 50 and 20. They're then going to use this to allow them to add tens numbers over 100 without counting by tens. So now if I'm adding 70 and 50, I could put 70 on the number line. I want to jump straight to 100 because that's the next place value. To do that, I'm going to add 3 tens. I have 7 tens. I'm going to end up with 10 tens, so I'm going to add 3 tens. How did I partition my 50? I added 30. I've got another 20 to add. So I have 100 and I'm adding 20. Using place value, that's 120. It's the same coming backwards over the 100. I've got 120, which is 12 tens. I want to get back to 10 tens. I have to get rid of 2 of the tens to do that. How did I partition the 50? I've subtracted 20. I want to subtract another 30. 100 minus 30 is the same as 10 tens minus 3 tens. I can use my friends of 10. If I've got 10 tens and I subtract 3 tens, I'm going to have 3's friend of 10 left. I'm going to have 7 tens left. Children will then move on to adding and subtracting tens to two-digit numbers. So for example, 74, and I want to add a tens number, 50. If I add the 50, I want to get to 100 first, but I'm not going to get straight to 100, I'm going to get to 104 because the ones digit won't change. I added 30, I've got 20 more to add, so when I add the 20, I get to 124. The same coming backwards, 124 minus 50. I want to get back to 100 first, but I'm also going to have the 4. So I'm going to get back to 104. To do that, I subtracted 20. How did I partition the 50? I've subtracted 20. I have to subtract another 30. 104 minus 30, 10 tens minus 3 tens is going to leave me 7 tens plus the 4 ones. Children are then ready to subtract and add two-digit numbers by putting together what they know about adding and subtracting ones over decades and what they know about adding and subtracting tens over hundreds. Now this is what they're going to be focusing on for the rest of the year. So they're going to start in this term and then they're going to continue investigating, adding and subtracting single-digit numbers, tens numbers and two-digit numbers all year. Now while they're looking at this, they're also going to be looking at the patterns of adding and subtracting hundreds, tens and ones, and that comes into what we were just talking about in terms of what digit will change and why, and what digit won't change and why. They're also going to be looking at regular and irregular two-dimensional shapes. They're going to be looking at the lines on the two-dimensional shapes, whether they're straight or curved, whether they're vertical, horizontal or parallel. They're also going to be looking at measuring using informal units and turning their informal unit into a ruler. This will develop deep understanding when they do start using a ruler that's pre-made for them using centimetres, that their centimetre is their unit of measurement and they need to start measuring at the beginning of a centimetre, not at zero. If a ruler doesn't have zero, children who are given the rule that you start measuring from zero, they'll end up starting from one and then they'll get their measurement wrong. So by making an informal ruler, they get deep understanding that they start measuring from the beginning of a unit of measurement. In Term 2 of Year 2, children will continue their investigation of adding and subtracting tens numbers leading up to adding and subtracting two-digit numbers. They'll also start to add and subtract coins, and they will work out change by starting from the amount and counting up to how much they had. This links to 100 cents in $1, 200 cents in $2, and so on. Children will also be investigating arrays. Now when a child makes an array, they're actually dividing into an array. So they're going to divide their counters into an array. They're then going to describe what they did in a division number sentence. And then they will describe what the array looks like in a multiplication number sentence. Division comes before multiplication because in real life children divide but they never multiply. They can skip count to find the total in the array, and they can also start to record multiplication and division as repeated addition and repeated subtraction on a number line. Now they're going to continue their investigation of the two ways to divide. So when we divide by 2, we can divide by 2 by making groups of 2, or we can divide by 2 by making 2 equal groups. They'll be recording their number sentence explaining that if they divided by 2 by making groups of 2, they started with say 6, they divided into groups of 2 and they found that that made 3 groups. If they divide by making 2 equal groups, they'll record their number sentence as I started with 6, I divided into 2 equal groups, and I found that there were 3 in each group. They will also start to investigate area using informal units, and they will start to use an array grid to work out the number or the area of their two-dimensional shape. They'll also investigate maps, and they will start to describe position using informal language on maps as well. In Term 3 of Year 2, children will investigate the relationship between addition and subtraction. They will investigate difference in 3 ways. So for example, if I have a tower of 5 and a tower of 2, I could count up from the tower of 2 to find the difference. I could count back from the tower of 5 to find the difference, or I could just have the tower of 5 and take away 2 of them to find the difference. So difference in 3 ways and solving missing number sentences is a focus of Term 3. Children will also be continuing their investigation of adding and subtracting single-digit, tens numbers and two-digit numbers throughout the whole year. They'll be starting to solve problems using addition and subtraction, And they will also begin to investigate the two-dimensional shapes on three-dimensional objects. So the three dimensions are up and down, left to right and front to back. A three-dimensional object has all three of these dimensions. The surface only has two of these dimensions. So the surface is a two-dimensional shape. And investigating whether the surface is curved or flat. If it's curved, it's just a curved surface. If it's flat, it may be a face. How do we know if it's a face? If the lines around the shape are straight, then it is a face, and the lines are called edges. If the lines around the surface are curved, then it's just called a flat surface, and the lines are just called curved lines. So these are the kind of concepts that children are going to be really investigating deeply this term. They're also going to make a measuring device to allow them to measure liquid volume. So they're going to measure the capacity of a container, for example in egg cups, but instead of having to continually fill the egg cup, they're going to make a measuring container like a measuring cup using informal units. They're also going to begin to measure volume by displacement. So they're going to see that if they've got a solid object that they can't measure by pouring water into or by packing, they could measure its volume by placing it in water, and the amount of water that is displaced is equal to its volume. They're also going to be investigating the likelihood of events using chance language. They're going to collect data using tally marks, make lists, make tables, and make picture graphs. They're then going to also investigate the duration of time using informal units, and they're going to investigate calendars to work out how long it is until an event. In term 4 of Year 2, children continue their investigation of division by dividing by 4. They're going to divide by 4 in two ways, by making groups of 4 and by making 4 equal groups. When they make their 4 equal groups, they're going to link that to quartering, because when you divide by 4 by making 4 equal groups, you can pick up a quarter of your whole group. They're also going to link quartering of shapes to quartering of groups. So they're going to be quartering their shape and then, for example, placing a quarter of their counters onto each quarter of their shape. When they investigate quartering shapes, they're going to relate it to halves. So they're going to start with a whole shape, they'll divide it in half, and then they'll divide it in half again. So as well as explaining that it's called a quarter because it is a quarter as big as 1, whatever their 1 was, they'll also explain that a quarter is half as big as a half. They divided their half in half to make a quarter, so a quarter is half of a half. This is informal at this stage, but when they get to Year 3, they need to really investigate this formally, so they need this beginning development of understanding of the concept to make sure they're ready by Year 3. Children often struggle with fractions because they see them additively. They see them as, I added a quarter plus a quarter to make a half. That's additive. Fractions are actually multiplicative. We're dividing to make fractions. So we want children right from the beginning to say that it's called a quarter because it's a quarter of 1 and it's also half of a half. They're also going to investigate time to the quarter hour on digital and analog clocks. So make sure you have an analog clock in your classroom all year and refer to it as often as you can, because children often won't have an analog clock at home anymore. So at quarter past, the hand has travelled a quarter of the way of the clock. Make sure children have their own small clocks that move, where the hands move in sync. This means that as they're making the minute hand move a quarter of the way around the clock, the hour hand has moved a quarter of the way to the next number. Then when it's moved 2 quarters, they can see that it's moved halfway. Then when it's moved 3 quarters, they can see that it has a quarter of the clock left to go. In this way, they can do quarter 2 as well. That's the trickiest one. They're also going to be looking at 1 step flips, slides and turns, and understand that these transformations don't change the features of the shape. The shape still stays the same, just its position and the way it's facing may change. They're going to investigate mass using an equal arm balance, and this time they'll be measuring mass using informal units. So multiple informal units in this side of the equal arm balance to balance whatever it is that they're measuring the mass of. So these are the concepts that children will be investigating in Year 2.